Hi, guys. Can you guys see and hear me okay? How's it going? Let me just make sure this is all on. Wait, it's backwards today. Okay, we are good. How are you guys? It's so good to see you and hear some of the stories and the progress and just everything about where you guys are at is so wonderful. Hi, Nellie. Really happy to be here today. I'm having a nice, relaxing day. Okay, so today I was going to hold, a lot of people still ask me a lot of attachment style questions. So the theme of today is going to be a little bit of like open attachment style Q&A. But I also am just going through some of the Facebook questions, and there's some really great questions. Ooh, is it echoey? I know why, because I was recording something earlier. Is it less echoey now? It should be better now. Let me turn this around as well. Please let me know if it's better. I record a whole bunch of different things, and I was just recording something. Hi, Jesse. From the other day, from this morning. Yeah, okay, good. Nice. Hi, everybody. Okay, I'm so glad to see you guys. So, I want to talk a little bit. I can turn the gain down a little bit as well. And it's in the mode it's supposed to be in. Okay, perfect. But still echoey. There, it should be good now, hopefully. Is that better? Always improving the technical stuff. Okay, so I wanted to just go through some really amazing questions. There's some really beautiful questions. There's some really wonderful comments as well. What's been a wonderful, wonderful blessing to me and just to watch is, so historically I worked with clients for a very long time first, and that was like my big, practice, like what I spent a lot of hours of my week doing. And then I had a lot of client requests that a lot of people I couldn't see. And so I opened the inversion version of the personal development school, where I was teaching classes and just like allowing people who I couldn't see one-on-one to sort of come in, sit in on classes, facilitating information I thought people really needed, and that I was essentially teaching in client sessions anyways, and then teaching those classes in person. And so there are certain signposts for me when people are healing, and I have seen them repeatedly. And so one of the things I was wondering is, hey, when I do the online version of the school, because I'm not face to face with people, will I still see the same signposts? And just consistently everywhere, I'm seeing the same signposts of everybody. So it's interesting because it's like, one of the things I've always been able to do is personally track people's healing progress and notice like where people are at. And right now, basically the Facebook and I actually can go in and look at the progress in the courses and stuff too. I'm not spying on everybody too much, but I am like checking in with people and just making sure that they're feeling good and moving along and seeing where people are getting stuck. And I have my team reach out to people if anybody looks stuck in a course or anything like that. But what I'm seeing in the Facebook group is all the same signposts of healing that I've been seeing everywhere else. And these are things like more vulnerability, open communication, people sharing in a way where they're noticing their stories and starting to question them, people speaking about other people's stories. Hey, I noticed you might be telling a story in this situation. People saying that they're emotional triggering. Magni was one of them. I'm not sure if I'm saying that properly. It's so funny. I feel like I know you so well, but Magni is saying, oh, do I have to do something myself about the echo? Oh. Turn off your microphone. Oh, did it work? Okay, good. Hi, Scott. I'm so happy you made it. Amazing. Okay, good. Thank you, Marcelo. Marcelo, you're like the tech whiz here. I appreciate it. So after noticing other people's stories and telling them what is your take, I'm going to go through a whole bunch of this. It's a great question, Max. I know Marcelo's a star. So I'm noticing all these beautiful signposts of everybody. And I just like, you guys are doing a fantastic job at being accountable, at sharing, at being vulnerable, supportive, everything. And about noticing your stories, noticing your needs, communicating your needs. Like I just see all these beautiful, consistent themes everywhere. So I'm going to just go through and highlight some of the questions that are really powerful in here that I think everybody needs to have answers to, just to sort of guide the process a little bit more. And then we'll do some open Q&A just about attachment styles in general, because those are the questions I'm still getting a lot of the most. So Magni, one of the questions you said, and I just wanted to bring up some of this. I'm going to do a whole personality needs course because I see a lot of you guys are moving in that direction now. And the personality needs course is a very powerful one. And it brings a lot of insight and awareness. So your question here from yesterday was, what needs do training and spending time in nature fill? So training, if you mean like sports training, I'll actually do that one separate. Nature, for most people, remember, it's all about your personal perception. Most people, it's spending time in nature is connection or spirituality. So it's either emotional connection, because for some kids, they found like connection in childhood to trees, to nature, finding like a sense of peace in nature, feeling like they were connected to the animals in nature, the birds, being by the water, things like that. And there might be a sense of nostalgia, so emotional connection to self or to nature as a whole. These are the things I most often see. Or connection to spirituality. Like there's a lot of really powerful spiritual lessons embedded in nature, right? And so sometimes it sort of brings out that feeling within us of sort of that magical feeling of connection and spirituality. And so some of those things. Training can absolutely be personal growth. If it's like physical training, I'm not sure what kind of training you mean. And it can also be the value of achievement or health if it's physical training. So just some sort of points to note there. So what you guys are looking to do in that course, and I love that everybody, wrote some stuff in here. Awesome. I love that you were like, I think you can just keep asking yourself why you're doing this. That's exactly how to basically facilitate that information for yourself. So that was wonderful. Awesome. I liked your joke as well of watching movies and being like, oh, this person's fearful avoidant, this person's dismissive avoidant. I do that a lot. So another couple things in here. Do you go through all the workbook exercises, or do you do the ones that resonate with you most? I advise to go through the workbook exercises and like make some notes and go through all of them. But there are certain ones that you will feel are really meant for like habit for you. So one of the ones I push all the time and I will always recommend the most is the emotional processing worksheet, because if you can get your brain into the habit of thinking that way, and this is the questioning your stories and then underneath finding your needs and strategizing for them. If you can get your brain into the habit of thinking that way, it's very hard to stay emotionally stuck. It actually becomes like, oh, how is it possible to be emotionally stuck? Like it really like turns all of that on its head, because that's what your emotions are there for. They're there to help you see that those two things are out of alignment. So once you start taking action, that starts to shift. And then for things like in the different attachment style courses, you'll notice there's exercises that kind of emphasize more for certain attachment style courses. Or if you find that there's an exercise and you're just like, oh my gosh, like let's say, for example, you've never set boundaries and you didn't even really know much about what boundaries were, or you didn't even know how to set them. And then, that's going to come up in the relationship mastery course. There's an exercise for how to set boundaries, things like that. You want to be able to go, okay, this is a big focus for me because I can tell this is a big missing point. And so that, I would say, do the exercises a few times, practice them, visualize them, like really move through them, because the most powerful thing you can take from these courses is, A, the awareness is for sure, but B, the application. Like these are very application oriented courses. So it's not just, hey, here's some cool information and some facts. It's like, hey, go out and use these tools and practice them and ingrain them in your life and incorporate them. And the beautiful thing is, like, you don't have to do everything all at once. You can move at any pace that you want to. I almost think it's better to like absorb and move slowly and really process and think about things. But these are all of this information you guys are getting are basically just processes that over the years I've like obsessively explored and researched and studied and done all these different sort of certifications in, and then applied into my own life and seen the changes and then lived them, and then been like, oh my goodness, I went from like tremendous pain and suffering to peace and gratitude and openness and feeling like life doesn't have to be so difficult. And now I was like, okay, I have to share these things. So really, like, the immersion of these things in your life will make a huge impact. So take your time with them, practice them, really push those things into your life and into your daily habits and practices. And we want to think of everything in life as a relationship. So we have a relationship to ourselves. We have a relationship to the way that we communicate. We have a relationship with how we manage our pain, how we transcend our pain. We have a relationship with our own stories, with our own, that voice in our mind that narrates our lives all day. We have a relationship with our own personal boundaries. We have a relationship with food. We have a relationship with exercise. We have a relationship with all these different things. And it's really about, checking in with your relationship in these areas and creating a lifestyle for yourself that builds healthy relationships in all of the areas of your life with all the different things that you do on a regular basis. So another question in here, just a few other ones I want to touch on, and then I'll go through all the group questions. Another question, Megan, you asked some really good questions. You said, as I keep working, I tend to feel less and more seldom the extreme attacks of emotions at 8 to 10 out of 10. A weird thing sometimes happens to me when I feel pain, but it's at the 1 to 5 scale. I think, what's going on? Shouldn't this feel much worse? Am I suppressing my feelings? I guess it's all part of the process. So, and I know you're... you said, but especially going through this breakup, I sometimes think this, and then I'm not sure if you meant to keep typing, but you put emojis, and they look like happy, sweet emojis. So this is exactly one of the signposts of healing. So what you'll start seeing, and you're probably seeing some of this already, is it can be any of these symptoms. Okay, we're looking at like symptoms in a good way in this case. Symptoms of something that used to bother you at a 9 or a 10 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10 now is like 5 or less. And usually when it's 5 or less, it's just unmet needs. And we're always going to go through natural transitions of unmet needs in life. And we're always going to feel a little bit of pain, but suffering is the story we tell about the pain. And when the story starts to get taken out, pain starts to become quite manageable. And then we can look at it and go, okay, so what is this pain telling us? And we can start moving in a different direction and feeling empowered. And really that pain is there to push us to grow and to expand. If we didn't have pain, we wouldn't evolve, right? So pain is a really important feedback mechanism from that perspective. So that's one of the big signposts you'll see, or you'll see that you get these big pain attacks or suffering attacks just less frequently. Or you might just see that when they do happen, this is sort of in the earlier stages, you can find your way out of them faster, or you find realizations from them more quickly. So like you get upset, and then instead of just, feeling like you get really upset and it kind of fades away after a few days and you move on and you just kind of repressed and time healed, or you got over it. Instead, you're taking insights and awarenesses from what's happening. And what that's doing is, even if you're not being able to transform the pain in real time yet, what that's doing is it's building you up for that. So the next time that you get into a painful situation, you're building more and more awareness to start understanding yourself in that moment. And that's going to be the place that you start to really be able to make these transitions from. So that's another really wonderful signpost of healing that I just wanted to mention, because I see that comment, and then I've seen a lot of other individuals comment that in comments on other people's comments in a variety of different forms. So I thought that would be important to go through. I also saw Kelly post a very beautiful poem about questioning her stories. And I think Oslam's idea was to do a poem sort of thing and build. And I just thought that was the sweetest thing ever. So really great questions. And I'm going to go through. Yeah. Hi, Mark. How's it going? Yeah, exactly. Relationships to everything. Marty Crow, embarrassed to say I haven't started yet. Just felt that I needed to grieve and heal a little first. I've started to socialize a bit more, and this makes me feel more ready. Typical fearful avoidance. You haven't started yet in terms of what? Marty, this is actually, Marty is John, right? I think. No, Jay Sharma. Yeah. Oh, you haven't started the worksheets. Okay, that's okay. Don't worry. Honestly, if you start with the information and then you go back into the worksheets, listen, the way I want to advise everybody to work, and this is not just like on these courses, this is in life, is that your subconscious mind is constantly building associations. Your brain is an association making machine. So if you start anything, and let's say you want to start a new habit, let's say you want to start some kind of new job, career, you want to start a business, you want anything you want to start that's new, if you judge yourself and you don't move at a pace that works for you and makes you feel inspired and empowered, then your brain's just going to build negative associations and is more likely to self-sabotage. So if you're just like watching the courses and absorbing the information, and if that's making you have these awarenesses and opening, then that's beautiful. And then the next thing is maybe you just set an intention or a goal and you say, okay, I want to do one worksheet this week, and I'm just going to start one out and see how it goes and not pressure myself. Then what you keep doing is you keep building more and more positive momentum, positive associations, and you'll see things grow and expand. And your brain won't start finding this like resistance piece to it, if that makes sense. I'm so glad that you are learning every day. Yay. I'm so glad, Nellie, that you're feeling less pain as well, because that's beautiful. I remember just a couple weeks ago, you were, hi, Sky Goddess. I remember just a couple weeks ago, you were feeling like, oh my gosh, this is really tough. I'm just getting out of a breakup. And that's an amazing transformation really quick, Nellie. You must be questioning your stories a lot, which is beautiful. So what I wanted to do is leave room for like open Q&A or live examples. Like if you guys want to touch on any live examples of challenges that you're facing, anything that you're going through in a relationship, questions that you have, that's what I really wanted to be the focus of today, because I've done a lot of like live exercises lately. And I just wanted to make sure I'm holding space for a lot of the attachment style stuff as well, because that's a big request point. So if you guys have any big questions or anything like that you want to go through, I am just going to hold some space for that right now. And in the meantime, because I know you guys are going to be, your question is above. Let me see. Where is your question that's above? I don't see it for some reason. Sky Goddess, will you retype it? All I see is thank you for all of your videos. And Phoebe as well. I want to make sure that Phoebe has her questions answered. So making sure that you guys are all, hopefully I'm not missing anything, but I don't see a question from you. I just see thank you for all of your videos. And then I see 12:15. I don't see timestamps on the questions. Yeah, sorry, I don't see anything. Will you just copy and paste it again if you don't mind, so I can answer it? The first thing I see from you is thank you for all of your videos. So I'm just gonna, if you don't mind, yeah, Awesome doesn't see the question either. Okay, so I'll answer some of these questions while we're waiting. So Stuart, hi Stuart, says, hi Thais, how can I tell the difference between an FA feeling of duty to stay in wow. These are lovely questions. I love I think these questions should be put into some of the courses, because these are, okay, so I'm just going to read this out loud. I didn't even finish reading the question, but I can tell where it's going and I love it. So, hi Thais, how can I tell the difference between an FA feeling of duty to stay in contact with someone as opposed to just feeling it's right to respond to them? For example, I feel sometimes I have a duty to speak to my mother a certain amount of times. Should I just be really in contact when I want to? So one of the first things I would ask myself around this is, when does my feeling of duty start to take a negative toll? So for example, let's say that you start feeling pressure to be in contact with your mother a certain amount of times. How do you start showing up when you are in contact? Are you truly there? Are you truly vulnerable? Or is it more like being there, but being kind of tuned out, or being in resistance, feeling frustrated because I should be here, and there's a feeling or sense of pressure, expectation, and wherever there's a tipping point where there's a negative toll, that's where you know that you have to take a step back. So that's one way of gauging. There's a couple different ways. Another way is looking at it from the perspective of what are my needs and writing them on paper. Okay, what if it was just me, what would my needs be in this situation? How often would I want to speak to my mother? And then maybe asking your mother what her needs are, or making like a hypothesis, like sort of an educated guess based on past experiences and things she said for how much you think she wants contact, and then trying to find a place where you're sort of compromising and meeting in the middle, but being authentic to your needs at the same time. Because if we miss that piece, then we're entering into an inauthentic relationship. And that, as long as we're inauthentic in a relationship, that will always have a more negative toll than just about anything else over the long term. It creates resentment, frustration, a disconnect. You're connecting to people through walls, not fully authentically in your truth, right? So those are two really powerful ways. And sit with yourself, right? Sit with yourself and ask yourself this question. And I think that that's a really beautiful thing. And notice as well, how are we making decisions? Are we making decisions because we're afraid of feeling guilty? Or are we making decisions because it's in alignment with our truth? And that's a really important question for especially all fearful avoidance to be asking. So amazing, amazing question, Stuart. I love that. Let's see what else. Do secure people tend to feel more mature than other attachment styles? I know a lot of us feel like a child sometimes. It's a really great question. So do secure people tend to feel more mature? I wouldn't say that they necessarily feel more mature. Like, I'm not sure that they're consciously walking around going, I'm more mature. Like, I can't speak. I started off as a very insecure attachment style. So I can't speak like from my own perspective now, being in a secure space. I'm working in the field, so I'm not sure if I think my opinion really counts there. Because I just look at people and I'm like, oh no, they're in pain. Like, that's sort of my take. And then I sort of have respect and understanding for people's pain, because I'm like, oh, I get it. Like, it comes from trauma and it's just hurt. It's not their fault or anything like that. But do secure people generally? I mean, okay. So historically, when I'm like with people in couples therapy, and there's like the partner who's secure and the other one might be insecure, some kind of insecure attachment style. Sometimes the partner feels confused. That tends to be like the general thing I see most often. Again, I'm just stereotyping and I'm not stereotyping, I'm like patterning. But what I can see is that some people sometimes are just like, oh, they feel like confused, exasperated. Like, why doesn't my partner, why are they acting like that? I just want to connect. I just want to have peace. I don't get it. Sometimes they don't understand. And there can be some of that I see coming into play. But in terms of just, in terms of like looking down on others and thinking they're more mature, it doesn't happen. At least I haven't seen it happen. I'm sure it does happen at some point somewhere, but it's not like a major pattern that I observe. But they do tend to just have more mature patterns in an emotional way, because what they've basically been taught in childhood is, hey, when you cry, you get heard, your emotions get observed and connected to, and people are present with you. When you express needs, people show up fairly consistently, so you can trust people. So they have a lot of these natural prerequisites, of course, inside of their programming that are there that create healthy relationship dynamics. So feeling like communication is safe and not scary. You guys probably know the feeling of being about to communicate your needs or being about to share your emotions, and it's something vulnerable and it like feels terrifying. It feels like so scary. Most secure people just don't really experience that. Maybe for certain things, they'll have their own little wounds and feelings of shame or embarrassment or things like that. But as a general rule, they don't have that same degree of fear and vulnerability that's causing them to unconsciously avoid communication. So secure people, generally, they don't think they're more mature or anything like that, but they do have a little bit more emotional maturity in certain areas, just because they didn't have to go through those pain points. They have more mature strategies for working through things. Let's say that, for participating in relationships. We could argue from the other side that people who have gone through more pain could have more emotional maturity in some ways too, because they've really lived stuff and they've had to take accountability and transform, and they've, so we could look at it from either perspective, but they definitely have more mature strategies and habits that are just naturally part of their programming. So cool question. I like that. So Linda says, I'm feeling less frozen now. Yay. That is wonderful. That's another really great signpost of healing. You're getting out of fight, flight, or freeze mode. And I remember when you started, you were saying like, oh, I feel all this overwhelm and freezing. Great job. That's a huge win. And starting to do art as well and find it dovetails with the growth and courses nicely. That is so beautiful. And also, like, keep in mind as well, we will always be human beings. I am definitely not somebody who advocates for perfection. And your healing journey is going to go, like, if I could graph it, this is everybody. This is not myself. This is me and hundreds and thousands of people I worked with in classes, workshops, clients. It's like this. It's not like if you could sort of graph your healing journey, it'll, it's obviously not exactly like this, but it's moving like this, like from starting here and it goes up and there's little points where you come down and like, you're always going to be a human and you're still going to have things. I got frustrated yesterday. I was in this parking lot and somebody almost hit my car and cut me off. And I felt this frustration for a second and calmed it down and, maybe like 3-5 seconds, but like felt this frustration and I was like gonna honk at the guy and like say something and I'm like, okay, hold on, and there's just, we're always gonna have little things that are coming and that will come back up. But just like we're all saying in here, you'll feel those things be so much more manageable and so much more infrequent. But at the end of the day, I want to be really sure and very supportive to let everybody know that you're going to be a human, you're going to have your human emotions, but the difference is going to be you're going to know what to do with them and how to resolve them instead of just feeling like stuck and confused and like you're floating. And so that's a really important way of looking at this. I think Max asked a question earlier, Thais, about noticing other people's stories and telling them. What is your take on this? Noticing other people's stories. I like this idea of having relationships to many subjects in life. Okay, so when you say other people's stories, Max, do you mean like when I notice other people telling stories? And what do I do? And I just want to ask a couple clarifications. Is this also that I notice people telling stories and then these are people close to me, or do you mean like clients or people that I've known, like family members historically? I'm just curious about that part of your question. What else in here? I don't see the question. Brian. Hi, Brian. What is the impactful worksheet to begin with? The emotional processing worksheet. So it's in a couple of courses. It's in the Fearful Avoidant Attachment Style course, and it's in the Emotional Mastery and Belief Reprogramming course. And that is it's the third module in the Emotional Mastery and Belief Reprogramming course, I think. And it's a worksheet that's like the emotional processing tool. So it's titled Thought Reprogramming. And it's how we work through those patterns of thought when we're feeling triggered. It's the questioning of our stories and then finding our needs. And it is so important. So I definitely recommend practicing that one all the time. And it's going to, I could get into all the reasons why, but I'm not going to push too much, but it's a powerful, powerful sheet. And you'll see the process. If you haven't had a chance, Brian, if you watch the past couple of webinars where we did this worksheet live, it's really powerful. I think Nellie was there and was an example, and Ellie, and I don't think anybody else in this one, but just check it out and you can sort of see as you move through the process. It's just a very powerful way of really getting that transformation. Hi, Phoebe. So Phoebe says, I got upset about the idea of meeting somebody new. I didn't expect that kind of emotion, and I don't know if it was because I was grieving the loss of the relationship I wanted. Interesting. So I would ask you, because I have so many like clarifier questions I want to ask. So when you say you got upset with the idea of meeting somebody new, what were the ideas or the meanings that you attached to that is my first question for you. Did you make it mean that, oh, now the relationship I wanted can't come or it's over? Or did you make it mean, this new person is taking time away from myself and my healing process? Like I would really dig up all the meaning you gave to that experience and write all those things out. And then once you've identified all of those pieces of meaning that you're projecting onto the situation, that's when you're going to have your answer. So remember, this is in the emotional mastery course as well. If I'm upset, so like this is how I would approach this if I was in the situation. So I feel upset about the idea of meeting somebody new. Okay, so what am I making it mean, or why would it be bad for me to meet somebody new? And you might go, because that means that I wanted this relationship, and it means I'm truly accepting it as over. It means, and whatever it might be, pull up all those meanings and then work through those meanings. Okay, and that's the best way of resolving that. So it's a really good share. Sky Goddess, it looks like I keep missing part of your questions. I don't know if you guys can see it, but all I see is escape. I'm anxious but not doing my best to soothe myself. And then I see is spirituality an excuse. So I'm not sure if part of your questions are getting cut off, but is spirituality an excuse? This is a really interesting topic here. Something that I've personally studied quite a bit of. So I'm just trying to think of how to answer this question without going on for too long about it. So there's something called spiritual bypassing. Okay. And it's this concept that if we look at everything through purely a spiritual lens, that sometimes we will not take accountability for things. Now, I've spent a lot of time wondering about this because I'm a very spiritual person. I do a lot of meditation, a lot of studies of different like ancient traditions and philosophies. I do something called A Course in Miracles every day, which is like a lesson for every day to sort of like unwind the ego mind and practice spirituality. And I'm a huge advocate of having like a spiritual connection to something. So what I found, because I've lived in a very, very spiritual way, is that the spiritual bypassing isn't actually about living spiritually. It's about the stories that tend to be the collective agreements that we make when we're in this spiritual space. So for example, I know a lot of different people in like spiritual communities, okay? And I'm not like shaming or judging anybody, but it's just a pattern that I've known. People who are very spiritual and who are like meditate and do all these really beautiful spiritual practices and all these different things, but they're not balancing all 7 areas of their life. And spirituality is still one bucket of 7 in all the different areas of our lives. And I've seen people who are very like, in that spiritual space, but they're ignoring, let's say, for example, their financial space. And then I know people who have been really spiritual and then they're struggling financially, and then they start acting out of desperation because then the ego mind really comes online and is like, we're going to run out of money, or we're going to do this. And then they do not so great stuff. And that can range from all sorts of different places across the spectrum. So sometimes I see people who become overly focused in the spiritual area of their lives, ignore the other areas, and then act out in those other areas because they're abandoning them. Or some people who are spiritual who are like, F the system, I don't need money, we don't want to, but then they're like, stealing money from their workplace, or they're, doing these sort of things and justifying them. And it's almost like the ego mind kind of comes in and takes it back to us. So I would say spirituality isn't an excuse. Spirituality is a really beautiful, powerful thing, as long as the spiritual lens that you're seeing the world through isn't becoming a way of avoiding other areas of your life and then justifying it. Because truly, for true happiness and peace and joy and gratitude, we do have to be in some kind of balance within all 7 areas of our lives. We're here to master all 7 areas and do the work in all 7 areas and take a cold, hard look at anything that's not working and look at why. Something I do every year that I love doing. I've like actually I've started to start it early before the new year starts. As I go through all 7 areas of my life, and I'm like, okay, this year, where was I out of balance? What was I ignoring? Why was I ignoring this? Where can I improve? I just go through a whole inventory. What stories was I telling myself in these different areas? I have this little workbook that I go through, like a worksheet for myself. I can post it online. I made it a couple of years ago, but I was going to put it in the January New Year's course. But it's just an inventory of your life and looking at all your different patterns and trying to make sure that, hey, if I've been, and you guys will notice this, if you all look at your lives, anywhere you're ignoring for too long, the universe will start coming. I mean, I say the universe, this is like from like my sort of perspective, but things start to unravel at that point in your life. Things start to come in and try to wake you up to those areas of your life. Like if you are ignoring relationships, then people start getting frustrated with you. People start going, hey, like, where are you? What's going on? And there starts to be more drama from ignoring it than through resolving whatever the problem might have been in the first place that you were trying to avoid. Same thing with like, let's look at the stereotypical man on Wall Street. The guy who's like career and financial, doesn't take care of his physical health. He's working all the time. So he doesn't exercise. He doesn't eat healthy. He's always eating fast food. He's on the go. He's got like high stress, high whatever job, mental, emotional, physical ignored in his life. And eventually he's going to maybe have to take more time away from career and financial to go resolve the mental, emotional, physical areas of his life, because he's in a place where he's ignored those areas for so long. And there's all these issues that have started to happen, right? So if we don't have intentional balance at the conscious level and we're not checking in with all 7 areas of our lives, eventually, because things start to unravel and all of those areas of our lives are very valid, then we have to go into emergency mode and deal with something. And that's going to sacrifice the other areas of our life that we were so obsessed with focusing on in the first place, right? So really important to stay in balance there. Oh, wow. I see all these comments now. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm like taking too long to answer questions. I hope that all makes sense though. Rosa says, I think as an FA, I have always felt very serious and grown up because I caretook my parents. Yes, that is very common amongst FAs, Rosa. Usually FAs have at least, directly or indirectly, it is very, very common for fearful avoidance to have at least one parental figure that parentifies the child. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, narcissists parentify their children. They put them in the parent role. They make them the therapist, the whatever. It's not just narcissists. It can be direct or indirect. It can be that the parents are dumping on the kid and going, oh my God, this person did this person did that. And that can happen. And that can just be because there's like, the parents are not in an emotionally healthy place at the time. They don't necessarily have any conscious recognition of the impact. It can also be because one of the parents is an addict. It can be because one of the parents does have a personality disorder like NPD, BPD, histrionic, whatever it might be, right? So it can be for a variety of different reasons, but that is one of the things that produces the fearful avoidant attachment style, because it's sort of this one-way emotional connection where the child's feelings and needs are not necessarily seen and heard, but they are seeing and hearing and at least getting presence and connection from the parent. And so the fearful avoidant, what does it give you? It gives the anxious side, like, oh, I need the closeness from the parent. So that gets satisfied. But then there's also this discomfort that takes place in the connection from the parent. So it's like, come here. I want closeness. I want connection. And then if there's a lot of programmed associations of the parents giving the child their pain, then there's also this like, ooh, go away. I can't take it. It doesn't feel good. And that's a lot of the flip-flopping you see across the fearful avoidant, from the anxious to their avoidant side, sort of ping-ponging back and forth, are all the positive associations with connection and all the negative associations with connection, and having those two competing polarities within the personality dynamic. So that's one of the big things that can create the fearful avoidant attachment style. And I want to mention something because I see this all the time, and I just think this is a really important thing to touch on here, is fearful avoidance. So often think that everybody's feeling like they are in relationships. Fearful avoidance move from their activating side to their deactivating side, from their anxious side to their deactivating or avoidant side. And this can happen in a matter of minutes, right? You can be so anxious, so activating, and then so deactivating. And that move will make you feel sometimes in the moment, if you're a fearful avoidant, like you went from being so in love with a person or really caring about a person to being like, I want out of this relationship. This is not okay. And you scare yourself that your feelings can seem to shift like that, but your feelings are not about the relationship shifting like that. Your feelings are the internal experience of a trigger that's so strong within you that it's moving you from one side of the spectrum of anxiousness to the other side of avoidance. And what often happens is that because you go through that, you'll, without meaning to, project onto your partner that their feelings can flip like that as quickly as yours do. But nobody's quite flipping and shifting so dramatically across the feeling spectrum from anxious to avoidant like the fearful avoidant does. And so sometimes fearful avoidance will be like, oh my gosh, if my feelings can seem to go back and forth so often, so can everybody else's. And then they won't necessarily completely trust other people in relationships. That's like an added layer of distrust that gets produced. But even like dismissive avoidance, they're like already in a deactivating place. So the most they move from really is like deactivating to a little more deactivating. They don't have these intense shifts like the fearful avoidance do. So I just wanted to touch on that because it's an important thing to recognize. Jessie says, I have the tendency to always complete a task as quickly as I can. If there's another factor which hinders that, I feel a void and anxious. Waiting is torturing for me. Is this something related to attachment? I can't figure out the reason. Jessie, if there was, I like how Linda says, I identify as AA, moving towards secure. So Jessie, if there was something in childhood, Jessie, are you FA? That's my question. A lot of fearful avoidance and anxious attachments too, actually. But yeah, so a lot of fearful avoidance, the most I would say, felt a lot of pressure in childhood to earn their worth. And so sometimes what's happening is you're trying to do all these tasks, and your subconscious mind is actually associating to a certain degree that going through all these tasks is like completing things that are getting you closer to being more worthy. And then if something infringes on that, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm losing the ability to earn my worth, and I'm becoming more increasingly unworthy of love. Or it can just be negative associations you have to worry or to waiting in general. You're definitely FA. Yeah. So that's really common for FAs, is that it's like, you think that you have to earn your worth all the time. And so, oh my gosh, I'm running out of time. And a lot of FAs have a lot of unconscious pressure, expectations they put on themselves. They're really tough on themselves. And it just would have been that some of the messaging you got at some point along the lines in life was that you don't necessarily come into the world and you automatically are worthy of love as you are, but it's when you do good, when you succeed, achieve, that's when you're becoming more worthy of love. And this is really common, right? Like a lot of people get this, but fearful avoidants tend to internalize this the most. And then when you're checking things off and something blocks it, you're like, oh, I'm losing my worth if you're so identified with the things that you're doing. And fearful avoidants have a great capacity to identify with the things that they're doing, which make them this beautiful combination of really passionate about things, but also overly attached to things, which can have its downsides, right? So you want to practice sometimes a little bit of like what I would call healthy non-attachment, where you want to try to stay as rooted in the intentions of things as you can, like consistent with your intentions instead of the expectations. When we get into the expectation, like this has to go a certain way, it has to look like this, it has to be done at this time, we get into this rigidity of the mind, and the mind hurts us that way. Our thoughts about that can become very painful, and it becomes, like you said, like almost kind of torturous. And so it's really important to practice going, okay, my intention is here. I can adapt, I can pivot, I can move around things, but try to practice staying rooted in the intention instead of the expectation. You're welcome, Stuart. So, Linda says, I somehow missed this. Why does setting a boundary feel so unnatural to me? It feels like a brick wall, and it feels like resistance in my body. And sometimes I find it tiring and have to drop thoughts and do something else. So, what were your associations to setting boundaries in childhood, Linda? If boundaries in childhood meant that you were punished, or you were somebody withdrew from you or personalized it, if you had a parent or a sibling who really personalized that and would go, oh my gosh, like you don't care about me, or if you set a boundary with mom, and mom would be hurt or mad at you or punish you, or you weren't allowed to have boundaries, whatever version of that exists for you are going to be your subconscious associations for what boundary setting means. And then you're really going to have to it's the reason that you feel tired after is because it's your conscious and subconscious mind kind of warring against each other. Not warring, but like your conscious mind is like, hey, it's healthy to set a boundary. It's the right thing to do. And your subconscious mind is like, no, this is going to get love taken away from us. This is going to X, Y, Z. So ask yourself, what are you afraid that setting a boundary will do? And what are you afraid the impact will be? And then pull that up and question that story, because whatever story you have that exists there is what's creating the push away. And so now you have your conscious mind trying to push towards something, your subconscious mind pulling away and sabotaging it. And then it's basically a form of cognitive dissonance, which can create a lot of cortisol responses because it's going to be anxiety producing. And it can just create a lot of exhaustion because you've got these two aspects of self creating this sort of friction between what you're trying to do and what you're actually doing. And any of that is going to cause a lot of mental and emotional fatigue, which eventually trails into the body through cortisol and noradrenaline responses and all that stuff. That was a great question, though, by the way. I would look at what your associations, and it doesn't necessarily have to just be childhood. It could be childhood or a relationship you had in early adult life where somebody was controlling and didn't let you set boundaries or whatever it might be. Especially if you're anxious, it could even just be that you're afraid of losing connection. And for you, you're prioritizing in your subconscious mind your need for emotional connection over self-love, personal growth, that kind of stuff. Hi, Shayna. I can relate. I feel less mature than people my age, like a combination of living an adult and child in an adult body. Okay. So one thing I'm just going to say, and this is quite important. One thing I'm going to say is that I'm trying to think of sometimes I want to say all these things and I'm like, is this conducive time-wise? So let's look at it this way. There's something, okay, when we go through trauma, any kind of trauma, and trauma is basically something that you can't emotionally process. And so your subconscious mind and even nervous system sort of reorganize itself around. Trauma can be you were forgotten at school one day. And if the meaning you gave at the time was like, oh my gosh, my parents actually abandoned me and nobody was coming for me. And if that's impacting your ability to trust people, to pick you up, to connect with you, and if you're remembering it years later and reprojecting it, then that was definitely a trauma for you. So trauma is very subjective. And it's very much about our responses to things. And what happens when we go through trauma, and I'm not going to go into this a ton right now, but I'm going to go into it a little bit. What happens when we go through trauma is that it's almost like a piece of our psyche. We can use this analogy. You can think of a piece of your psyche like fragments and freezes in time. Okay. So I'll share a personal example for a moment over something that it's a great example because it's very not traumatic, but it was something that happened that popped up. And this is very much related to the childhood stuff. So when this takes place, it's almost like this part of your psyche that fragments in time and stays there is waiting for you to go back and fulfill that need. Okay. And until it does, you keep going into that childlike phase. Okay. So a couple of years ago, I was, my partner and I were living together in a different place than we are now. And he was going back to school and doing some stuff and doing some big changes in his life. And it was like a Tuesday night or something. And I was going to bed and he's like, oh, I'm going to stay up and do work. I'll come to bed in like an hour, 2 hours or so. And I was like, okay. And I went to sleep and I woke up and I looked at the time and he wasn't in bed. And it was like 3 hours later. Like it was longer than what he said. And I knew that he was in the house. Like I knew that he was there. He's not one person to like go out and do stuff very much. He's quite introverted. Like I knew he was in the house and he just hadn't come to bed yet. I could see the light under the door and I knew he was there for whatever reason. And I felt all of this like anger, betrayal, hurt, fear, a lot of fear, like feeling really childlike afraid. And because I knew this about, you know, how we can sort of get frozen in time, and because I'd had other experiences with clients and brought up these memories, there's this technique you can use, and it's called implicit memory retrieval. And what you do is, when you know that you're having an emotional reaction that's disproportionate to what the situation should be, like I knew laying in bed, waking up, I could feel all these feelings, but I was able to sort of observe them and notice, like, there's no way I should be this upset. Like, what am I even upset about? So I asked myself this question. I said, what is my earliest memory of feeling these feelings like this? And this is how we sort of pull up these memories. And implicit memory retrieval is sort of a way of feeling emotions, focusing on the sensation of those emotions, and then pulling up early childhood memories that are unresolved. And it's kind of like hypnosis while you're awake, like sort of sourcing memories while you're conscious. You're kind of engaging your conscious and your subconscious mind together. But the trick is you really have to feel the feelings and focus on the sensations. And I had this memory come up when I was a little kid. I was like super afraid of the dark. I was afraid of probably everything as a little kid. And I remember my parents, who were just trying to be really good parents, probably in this situation. Like, they would say that they were going to like sleep with me. Like, I was afraid that they would leave, and they would say, "Oh no, we're going to come to bed. We'll stay with you." And they would stay. And then when I would fall asleep, they would leave. And the thing is, and I never told them this or anything, but I would wake up all the time after they would leave, thinking that they should still be there, because I thought they were staying and they were going to sleep with me for the night. And they would be gone. And I would feel like terrified, because I'd be in the dark and angry and hurt and betrayed. And I hadn't ever thought about this in my adult life ever, because I just forgotten that ever happened. And I woke up and my partner wasn't there, and I had all of these feelings coming back. But the really big signature feature that showed this to me was that I felt like a little kid. Like, I felt childlike when I woke up, and I felt small and helpless and what's happening. And so anyway, so when people tell me this historically, in client sessions or in workshops or things like that, I always ask people, okay, so what's your earliest memory of feeling that way? And people will always pull up these early childhood memories that upset them, that they didn't have resolved. And then the trick is that you want to start giving those things to yourself now. So I comforted myself. I was like, I'm completely safe. I'm okay. I'm an adult now. I'm not in that situation. I was always safe. I was protected. Okay, what do I need right now? And what I needed was to get out of bed and just turn on the lights for a minute and just go and talk to my partner and just ask for connection and support. And so I just did that whole thing, comforted and connected to myself, assured myself that I was safe, I was okay, went and did the same thing with my partner. And the pain's gone, right? But what you're actually sort of doing is like integrating that piece of yourself that's sort of frozen back there, waiting for those needs to be met in a way. There's a much deeper science to it, but it's going to take so long to explain. So those are that's the analogy for it, if that makes sense. So if you guys ever have an experience like that, where you feel childlike, connect to the part of you that has an unresolved piece and ask yourself what it is that you're needing. Recognize that it's actually some unresolved feeling from the past, some unresolved experience from the past. Focus on the feelings and close your eyes. Like, focus on the feelings. Okay, where do I feel these feelings in my body? What do they feel like? Okay, what's my earliest memory of feeling this combination of feelings together? And more often than not, some people are better at this than others, you'll have these like really vivid memories come up. I've had people pull up early memories when they're in a crib, like things that they would pull up under a state of hypnosis, but they're not hypnotized. And I've pulled up some really early memories for myself as well. So, and they'll be very vivid. So ask yourself those questions and then meet that part of yourself's needs. It's a really effective tool. And it really connects you to some pretty deep stuff within yourself. So I hope I didn't go on for too long there, but I thought it was really important. Hi, Anna. So Anna says, I'm going through a difficult period after a breakup with my ex of 5 years. It's been 2 months. In the very first month, I started the personality needs course. I was really motivated. And I got stuck at the point where I had to find solutions to fulfill my needs of my own. I don't know how to do that. I feel disorganized and go from wanting to develop to trying to shut down. I sometimes find myself rejecting the notion of development. It's like I want to stay in this state. Yeah. This is normal. I'll tell you why in a second. I sometimes talk with my ex, DA, and I get triggered and feel horrible. I still hold so many things. I'm frustrated. I feel like he didn't appreciate me, and I often feel like I don't matter. I am not worth it. Okay. So one of the first and most important things you can do is question the stories, right? That you don't matter, or you're not worth it. Like, because see how your mind makes an association that the way he acts takes away from my worth. He makes me not worthy, right? Like I make it mean because of the way he acts that I am not worth it and I don't matter. So see how you give that? Now, when there's a resistance, it's normal because the mind wants to keep you safe. So if you had, pain points in the past where you wanted to open, expand yourself, and somebody made you feel like you don't matter or you're not worth it or whatever it might be, your subconscious mind is like, I'm not letting go of those stories because then I can tell when they're coming. And when I'm in that space of being able to tell when something's coming, I can better protect myself from it. So we call it the ego mind or the subconscious mind, even. You can think of it that way. The subconscious mind wants to maintain its comfort zone. It's one of its primary features. So this is very normal. And all you want to do is just move through little tiny incremental steps and reassure yourself, okay? So when it comes to fulfilling needs on your own, it's going to be one of the most important things you can ever do as a fearful avoidant. It's two things: meeting your own needs, questioning the meaning you're giving to situations. If you can master those two things, you'll start moving out of fearful avoidant attachment style. So in the emotional processing sheet, and I'll do another example of this in the future, and we can maybe use this as one of the examples, but you want to ask yourself the set of questions like, because my ex treated me a certain way, it means that I don't matter or I'm not worth it. Is that true? And do I have any proof for how I do matter in the world and to other people and to myself and how I am worth it? And what you'll see, as you keep equilibrating those stories and questioning them, when your brain starts to release those stories, it then doesn't feel the need to maintain that same comfort zone. Because do you see that, it's hard to explain sort of, but do you see that the story creates the behavior as well? It's like, if I believe I don't matter and I'm not worth it, then I'm not going to work on healing myself because I'm not worth the time to work on healing myself. I don't matter. So why would I bother helping myself? So the story itself is the root cause that then has the output of behavior. And we know this, right? We know that the belief patterns produce the thought patterns, right? The thought patterns produce the emotional responses, and they can refeed each other. But then we also know that neuroscience has proven that every single decision we make is based on emotion. So if we are in a space where we have these beliefs and they're producing thoughts and emotions, they're going to produce that action. So you want to recognize that, which you are, and you're doing an amazing job of, and then you want to practice breaking the cycle. So start questioning the stories. When it's fulfilling your needs on your own, pick little tiny things that you can do. So if it's a need for connection, try to journal for 10 minutes, try to meditate for 5 minutes, try to do something that's intimate with yourself. Journaling, meditation are very intimate acts, right? Of self-connection, because you're very present and with yourself. So pick things that are small and just pick them in tiny increments of time and try to intentionally, with your conscious mind, create new emotional associations. And remember, there's a big difference between being thought and intentionally thinking. So I'm going to do a video about this because it's a really important topic. But I was speaking to somebody the other day who came out of this really, really tough marriage, and a lot of her thoughts, this marriage was really tough. She had to go live in a shelter afterwards, all these things. And a lot of the thoughts she was having were about sort of, what if I get back together with this person? And it was like the worst relationship to ever think of getting back, unsafe, physically completely unsafe, scary stuff. And we're identifying that she's having trauma thoughts, right? These thoughts are because she got this programming from this person that was so deep and so intense that her thoughts are thinking her. She's not creating intentional thought. The thoughts are running on autopilot and just producing emotional responses on autopilot. And this is the vast majority of our day, right? Research shows the average person thinks 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day, and roughly 50,000 of those are just repeated thoughts from the day before. So what's happening, right, is that if that much of our programming, roughly, right, is repetitive, then our thoughts are thinking us. And there's a big difference between that and creating intentional thought. And we are not our thoughts. And I know this sounds like kind of woo-woo, but truly we are not our thoughts. Because if we were just our thoughts, we couldn't know that we think. We wouldn't have the ability to observe that we think, right? It's like if I can see the pencil, I'm not the pencil because there's a separation. It's like subject object. So if I can know that I think, I am not those thoughts. But what happens is your awareness, you as the awareness that you are, latches onto the thought and merges with the thoughts. And then the thoughts are actually running. And almost all thoughts, this is going to sound crazy, but truly, if you look, almost all thoughts are just the output of some unresolved traumatic event. So like, let's look, for example, let's say you have achievement-oriented thoughts. I have to be better. I have to try this. I have to get better in this area. I have to do this thing. And then I have to go there and do that to get better and improve and learn. And let's say it's just achievement-oriented, like something in your job, something in your work life, something in a sport that you play, something in a hobby you have, right? And you're trying to get better. Usually there's some time in your life that you felt not good enough. And there's some kind of deep need to get better because you're actually trying to fill some void of an old trauma, even if it's just a small one that's unresolved. Let's say you have thoughts about somebody leaving you. Somebody, so there is some kind of fear of abandonment that was really triggered and activated repeatedly at a young age. And a lot of those thoughts are coming from that. And when we are having trauma thoughts, we are being thought, and the thoughts are thinking us essentially. And what we want to be able to do is wake ourselves up out of that trance. We're sort of in this like hypnotic trance when this is happening. And we're just merged with thought, and we're not questioning them, and they're thinking us, and our thoughts are possessing us. Our mind is sort of possessing us instead of us being able to use our conscious awareness and observe that this is happening, notice that we're running some old painful story, and then intentionally create new thought. And that's the essence of healing, right? Because all of those thoughts, if you observe them, and if you observe how much more active your internal dialogue becomes when you're triggered, it's like all the trauma thoughts are like, like, oh my gosh, what do you mean this person's, I talked to my avoidant ex and this, and you'll feel that like intensity sort of speeding up. And that's as we get closer to trauma. Now, there are exceptions to these things. It's not all trauma thoughts, but the vast majority. And when you're in flow, or when you're intentionally creating thought, or you're using your conscious mind, or you're observing and producing a different response on purpose, consciously and intentionally, that's when we're out of that space where our thoughts are no longer possessing us, but we actually start to get in a place where we are possessing the thought. We are in control of our mind instead of feeling like it's the other way around. So I hope that makes sense. Okay. Max says, Thais, I'm noticing a lot of issues with which my friends have, and advise them how to process their emotions, sharing the tools. I see. Lately, hi, Mara. Okay, yeah. So hold on. Let me answer the rest of Max's question, and then I'll go to Mara's question. So, Thais, I'm noticing a lot of issues which my friends have, and advise them how to process their emotions, sharing the tools lately. I've been wondering if I'm pushing this too much with other people. I'm wanting everyone to be happy on this planet, and it's hard to see people suffering, but some people might not be ready to process them. Okay, so I'm laughing because like I've been there. I did this, and I see a lot of people doing this, to be honest. It's kind of like you wake up and you have this awareness, and it's like, oh my goodness, there's all these things that I can do here. So okay, so I've been through this, and I understand, and I see a lot of other individuals go through this, where they're in a space where it's like, oh my gosh, you should do this, you should do this. And so what I find as a general rule, there's no perfect answer to this question. Honestly, there's like, I'm like that too. I just want to help everybody. Like, oh my gosh, this person, I see them, really attached to their story, and they don't have to be, and there's another way. But it actually sometimes can cause pain. I remember feeling frustrated at the beginning, like, oh, some people just aren't getting it. And I really do think that there's some people that want to question their stories, really want to have an open mind, really want to heal, and some people that are truly just still in a place where they want to be identified with their stories, where they may not quite be ready yet for many different reasons. So my answer to you is to ask questions, So if we ever tell somebody something, that's our best way of getting sort of like rejected in a way from what we're trying to share. But if we ask like, oh, hey, what story do you tell yourself in that situation? What happens to you? Like, what goes on when you identify with that story? Like, do you feel better or does it make you feel worse? What would you feel like if that story wasn't a focal point? What's a different story that might be more accurate? These sorts of things we can inquire, but just remember, one of the best things you might be able to do is like really keep loving and working on yourself, and then asking people if they want your help or asking people if they want you to share and things like this. It's beautiful and it's wonderful that you're sharing and that you're being so open-hearted and all of that. But it can, sometimes we can actually push people in the opposite direction because they so don't want to hear, and we keep pushing. And I've honestly been there with people very close to me, like, oh, you look at this, do it this way, try, and if only they could see. So just be patient. It's normal that happens. It's so sweet of you that you're doing that and that you're so helpful and like open and giving with your energy and emotions and time. And so I just think, ask questions instead of tell people things, and then try to take note. Like if you feel resistance, you'll notice it. And you can maybe push a little bit more and just see, try one more conversation or thought. And if you still feel resistance, listen to the feedback you're getting and, pause, and you can always try another time. And I know that's sort of what happens. And I've heard this from many people. So good for you for showing up in the way that you are, though. So Mara says, hi, Thais, any suggestions for what is a good way to practice the techniques from the worksheet together for a fearful avoidant and dismissive avoidant? And Brian, I see your question, Brian. I haven't received an email from anybody, but it's because we're getting a lot of emails. So nobody forwarded me anything. None of my assistants. So I will send you an email so that you have my personal email, because I have a new one now. I'm just writing it down because I know who this is. Okay. So Mara says, hi, Thais. Any suggestions for what is a good way to practice the techniques from worksheets together for a fearful avoidant and dismissive avoidant? So my only question, Mara, is I don't know which worksheets you mean specifically because there's a bunch. So techniques together. Okay, so I would start. I'm just going to tell you what processes I think are the best for the fearful avoidant, dismissive avoidant combination. I think a really great place to start. So I have this in the conflict resolution course. A great place to start is, it goes a little more in depth than the conflict resolution module in the attachment style courses. So I would start by writing out both of your needs. This is in the first module of conflict resolution. Write out all of your needs and expectations. There's actually a workbook with like a needs and expectation inventory. And it's a really helpful thing to do when you're with a dismissive avoidant partner, because realistically, like, you guys are going to have totally different expectations about what the relationship should look like and feel like, and how much energy should be put in there and all of it. So it's really important to just like open that dialogue and have that conversation ahead of time. So I would start there, and then I would work through so much expressing your needs. The only way the fearful avoidant can be with a dismissive avoidant partner is if they work on expressing their needs. And if your dismissive avoidant partner is open to participating, which it sounds like they are, which is wonderful, I would definitely, with your dismissive avoidant partner, start playing like connection question type games. Like, because the more vulnerable they become, the more in their body they become, the more in tune with their emotions they become. And the more naturally they're going to start to want to access their own, not access their own, but really like connect, be open, meet your needs, hear you, all that stuff. So if you're getting them to do their own work, the feeling processing stuff is amazing. Like just checking in with what they feel, what they need, if they're doing that separately. And if you guys are maybe doing something in the morning together, that's a great one for them. And for you, I would work on questioning your stories the most. And then if you are doing something collectively, and it's just something you're doing together, like we have one workbook and we're doing things together here, I would do the fearful. So I would practice expressing your needs after you've taken like the needs and expectation inventory. Practice expressing your needs all the time, and then get them to be in a place where they're playing that connection game where it's the 60 questions, which is in the, it's in the fearful avoidant course or the anxious attachment course. I also put the 60 questions again as a worksheet in the extra section of the personal development school that just has extra worksheets that are common that I like push in a lot of the different courses. So you can just access it there. And so any one of those places, practice having those conversations. It's really important for the dismissive avoidant to start opening up and becoming more vulnerable. It's really important for the fearful avoidant to start expressing their needs. If you take a fearful and a dismissive together, and the fearful is not expressing their needs because they're naturally so overgiving and they naturally feel so much more for others than they do for themselves, what happens is over time, you're just going to be giving yourself away and not receiving. Conflict is born of a perception of imbalance. A huge imbalance is going to take place. And eventually, as a fearful avoidant, you're going to push back or pull away or end the relationship or get really frustrated. And then you're going to be in a place where, as a result of that experience happening, right, you are going to get really angry, resentful, frustrated, and the dismissive avoidant is going to feel unsafe and pull away. So you really want to make sure you correct that imbalance ahead of time. And so the two things that are going to do that the most are going to be those exercises. It's a really good question. So let's see. Rather support them. Mark. Hi, Mark again. As an FA, why was I mostly avoidant? Not being aware of at the time with my anxious wife when we were together, but now when we are apart, 6 months now, I am the anxious one. That's a really cool question. Okay, so restrict each portion. There. Okay. Marcelo, you're great. So as a fearful avoidant, why was I mostly avoidant? So you know that you're mostly avoidant because your wife is anxious, right? So this is probably what's happened, right? So you are mostly avoidant because your wife is anxious and you're in the home together. Whenever you're closest to somebody that's an opposing attachment style, you polarize each other the most. Okay. So you're in a situation, she's anxious, which is going to make you more avoidant because you're going to express the avoidant side of fearful avoidant, right? And so I think you know that, and that makes sense. And now you've split up and now you're feeling more like the anxious one. So what can happen, right, is attachment styles don't rule every part of a relationship. So what might have happened, or what this sounds like, is that she's either like really trying to move ahead and her attention is focused elsewhere, because she's trying to focus on moving ahead, or she's trying to heal, or whatever it might be. Or she's trying to work on herself, or she might have just adapted, and whatever that adaptation was triggered the anxious side of your attachment style. And so it doesn't have to be that because she's anxious, she's always going to be just the anxious one, period. What it can be is that she's anxious, but then she might have been anxious for years and years, and then at some point she had enough subconscious programs that sort of steered her in a different direction, and now she might be pulling back, and then you come in that side. Another thing that can be happening, I'd have to ask so many more questions, but another thing that could be happening is she could have been the one on the anxious side of fearful avoidant and you on the more avoidant side of fearful avoidant. And so you play the anxious and avoidant roles because you polarize each other, but she might have an avoidant side to her. And sometimes fearful avoidants, when they're on the anxious side, can seem very, very anxious. But if they have a capacity to shut down sometimes for prolonged periods of time, and if you've seen any history of that throughout the marriage, then you know that there can be, that she might be a fearful avoidant, because usually anxious individuals hardly shut down. They shut down for, a few minutes, maybe a couple hours, or they shut down as a subconscious strategy to try to, it's intentional. It's like trying to get you to care or to come in, or they're sort of testing or things like that, but they don't tend to last for long, versus fearful avoidance will tend to really push away when they do push away and really take time. And they can go for long periods of time in a fight or an argument or whatever it might be, creating that physical space and emotional space. So Magni says, I have such a hard time finding my needs. It's such hard work that it feels like it's completely unknown territory, almost like feelings and feeling language to DA. Is this normal for AAs? Yes, very normal. And so just the best thing you can do if that's a struggle is check in and ask yourself what your feelings and needs are throughout the day. It's a beautiful, powerful exercise. Start like just tuning in. If you really want to do this work and you want to commit, which I highly recommend doing, set an alarm every hour on your phone or every 3 hours or in a frequent amount that's obviously workable for your life and your workplace and whatever it is that you're doing. And set the alarm, and every time the alarm goes off, just check in. What emotions am I feeling? Where do I feel them in my body? What do I need right now? Are my needs being taken care of? And just keep referencing the tertiary emotion or the tertiary needs worksheet, and just keep checking in, feeling in. The more in touch you are going from feelings to needs, the more things will start to become normalized. Okay. And just notice what your needs are. If you don't have the answer sometimes, that's okay. Check back again a little while later, and you'll start to get the big ones. You'll start to be like, oh my gosh, my boss just said something that frustrated me. I need validation. I'm feeling like uncomfortable right now. I need validation and support. I need to know that I'm okay. And you'll get those big ones. And then as you get more familiar and more accustomed, you'll start getting the nuances of your needs. Okay. It's a great question and a great exercise if any of you guys are struggling with this. Yes, Sky, I still don't see your question. It might be down below. Okay, so hold on. I just, all I see is it says, yes, thank you. And then that's it, Sky. So I think I'm still missing your question. Jesse says, I'm so resonate with this. I'm always a high performer. Yes. And driven by reward myself and completing the task. Yes. Oh, thank you, Jesse. I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, good, Linda. Yes, there you go. Exactly. And I'm saying yes to you saying prioritizing the need for connection over self-love. And that can just be that you have a higher personality need around your highest personality need could be emotional connection or things like that. But you want to just keep in mind that for the greatest fulfillment in the emotional connection area, we have to have a relationship to ourselves that's very strong and alive and well, and we have to be filling our own cup. So you can just sort of make that reminder constantly in your mind, and it will shift into thinking differently about that work. Differentiate between intention and expectation. Yes. Have to remember, as a perfectionist, fearful avoidant, as I'm getting lost in the details. Yes, exactly. Exactly. And the more, okay, I'm going to say one other thing really quickly. The more that we are being perfectionists and getting lost in that, the more we are upholding the paradigm that we have to earn our worth, earn our love, because we're teaching that to ourselves, right? You're teaching this to yourself. You're saying, I have to succeed and do something. And then you're waiting for the reward for doing the thing so well. And you're keeping that love is conditional. Love is based on what I do, not who I am. My worth is based on what I do, not that I deserve to naturally feel worthy for my existence, which little kids do, right? Little kids come into the world and they're babies and they feel naturally worthy, and that either gets taken from us or doesn't by the programming we have. And so if you're in a space where you're upholding that perfectionist schema, so to speak, then what happens is you every time you keep being a perfectionist to yourself and holding yourself to such high standards and trying to exhaust yourself and do all this stuff, you are keeping the relationship to yourself in a way that says, I have to earn my worth in the world. And you're still re-traumatizing yourself in the way that you got that program implanted in the first place, because you keep enacting that on yourself. I hope that makes sense for you guys, because it's such an important thing to notice. And it's a good awareness to have. And a cognitive reframe is literally just to be able to make a shift and say to yourself, okay, you know what, even if this isn't perfect, I know I'm doing my best, I'm showing up, and that's all that I can do. Or, even if this isn't perfect, I can adapt, I can learn, I can grow. I don't have to be perfect all the time. It's okay to make mistakes. Like, things that are self-nurturing statements, when we catch ourselves being like that, are really, really powerful. And guess what? They increase your performance long-term, because you didn't waste all this time building negative associations to a task that you were trying to do through beating yourself up or being hard on yourself or criticizing yourself or exhausting yourself, all those sorts of things. Thank you so much, Marcella. That's so sweet. And Efrat, thank you guys. Yeah, isn't it amazing? Like all the little tiny memories. And when you practice that, you'll see lots of different memories and just little things pop up. It's a really cool technique to practice. I'm going to talk about it in a lot of detail in the trauma course when it comes out. So Magni says, what would you say is the most important thing for AAs to work on to move towards secure? So I would say the most important thing literally is what we were just talking about. It's for you to start getting in touch with your own needs and then meeting your needs yourself. And what that is it's the essence of self-soothing. And when you self-soothe, then you don't feel as dependent on other people, which takes out that codependent nature, which actually stops polarizing a partner, because if you're less codependent, they move less further away, and you put an end to that cyclical, I need you, come here, and then they feel stifled or overwhelmed, and then they push back, and then it further triggers you. So by being able to self-soothe, you also are able to break the cycle. And the essence of self-soothing is identifying your own feelings, your own needs, meeting those needs yourself. We could say questioning your stories too, but I would say less so. Hi, Natalie. For Q&A, when I'm really stressed out in life, are there differences in how when really stressed out in life, are there differences in how each attachment style reacts and thinks? Yes. Fearful avoidance, when they feel stressed out, tend to become very dismissive avoidant a lot of the time, although they can be really anxious too. So they do sort of like go one way or the other. Because I think, oh no, you're anxious, Natalie, not fearful avoidant. Your ex was fearful avoidant. I remember. So I'm going to start saying AJ. Just in case, because sometimes I'm like, oh, I want to remember your guys' names if the screen names are different, and then I'm like, oh, maybe the screen names are different for a reason. So AJ says, when stressed out in life, are there differences in how each style reacts or thinks? So dismissive avoidance go into some people I know joke, they go into the dismissive avoidant coma, right? Where they just sort of like retract from the world and take a lot of space and sort of go into themselves. And that's what they do. They withdraw, right? The fearful avoidant can go in one of two ways. It's interesting because when I see fearful avoidants really stressed out, I do tend to see them withdraw the most, because they also put a lot of pressure on themselves, right? They're sort of like these unconscious people pleasers. So they tend to associate, oh my gosh, more people, more time with people, more talking to people is more me giving my energy away. So I actually often see fearful avoidants become very avoidant when they feel overwhelmed. But I also do see sometimes fearful avoidants like start calling everybody and asking for answers and support. So that's sort of they can go either way. But as a general rule, I definitely notice more that they become more avoidant. And anxiously attached individuals tend to go to others for their soothing. So that tends to be the dynamic there. Efrat, it's a study done. I won't go into the whole study. I saw your question. It's a study done by Dr. Bruce Lipton. And I think he did the study with UCLA. I'm not 100% sure, but check it out and see. And there's all the details of everything in there. So Chelsea says, I can absolutely associate with the trauma thoughts. Yeah, breaking the patterns little by little. Aw, thank you. I even recognize myself fighting my conscious effort to change the thoughts. I feel like I was addicted to the abuse victimization because my mind will think I know I need to change these thoughts, but let me just think the negative ones for a little bit longer. It's wild to recognize. That was an amazing statement, like a really amazing statement. So that's exactly what it really comes down to, right? What is you being able to recognize that even the ego mind, the subconscious mind wants to stay there. And the reason the mind wants to stay there, like when you have these things where you want to stay in the abuse victimization space, it's because your subconscious thinks it's helping you. It's like, I'm not going to let go of that because what if it happens again? I have to be able to hold on to this and recognize it. But what your mind doesn't know at a more conscious level is that you'll recognize it if it happens. That hypervigilance won't go anywhere when it needs to come up, but you don't need to think it every step of the way up until, right? And by being more out of it and more objective, you'll actually catch things even more quickly. So you protect yourself most by having that space. So just keep gently reminding your subconscious, hey, I know this was a hard time. I know this was so scary, but we're in a better place now. I'm going to choose to think differently, and try to, the more comforting you become to your own subconscious, the better. So thanks for saying that. It's a beautiful point in there. And I'm so glad that you're doing the deep work. Shayna says, when having a conflict resolution discussion and sharing about the meaning I assigned to the situation, is it bad to say, I imagine that you see me as, and then in brackets, some negative way, or will this feel accusatory and possibly make the other person begin to feel defensive? I would just say, what the thing is in the conflict resolution course is when situation X happens, I interpret it in my reality as you saying X, and this is what I feel, and then this is what I need. And so what I would say here is, as long as you emphasize that it's like, this is what I imagine, and this is what happens inside of me, and like, this is based on my own wounds or my own past, and I'm recognizing it, but at the same time, it would really help if you could work with me on it to not do that thing. As long as you emphasize that it's coming from your space, it's very difficult for people to get defensive. I've seen very defensive people work through this and not get triggered at all, which is amazing. And Jermaine, yes. So you want to do the mastermind groups. Will you guys, I haven't had very much like excited feedback about the mastermind groups. So I wasn't sure if it was something that like I was just kind of pushing and people didn't want to do. But one thing I have is a whole bunch of worksheets for suggestions and connection for just how to go through and create mastermind groups together out of the school. So if you guys want to meet online or through Zoom and just have like your own little breakout groups and sessions, I have some worksheets for that. So I'll post them in the Facebook group, I guess. But I mentioned it, and then a couple people were like, oh, that feels like, it was one person in particular that gave me not as great feedback about not wanting to do that. But I think that person had some triggers and stuff going on too, at the time. So, like they were going through a tough period. So I just wasn't sure what your guys' stance is, and I keep trying to listen to feedback. So if you guys want to do mastermind groups, I have worksheets for you guys to connect, set up little Zoom calls, like just directions for how to use Zoom and set up calls and all these different things so that you can actually work with each other and work through some of the exercises and get feedback. So I'll post a big post in the group today. There's no pressure on anybody. That was sort of like the comment I got is like, oh, it feels pressuring that we have to do these things. And it's just not the case at all. Like totally up to you guys if you want to do it. And I won't be there or ask or anything like that. And obviously it's up to you guys to like, like participate as you want. There's no like requirement or anything. So I'll post something in there today. I'm glad you followed up, Jermaine. I'm glad that you wanted to do it. I think it's a cool idea. So Jessie says, Max, I think this healing journey is like spirituality. When people are ready, they will ask. Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's beautiful. So, Rebecca, let me just see here. Rebecca says, so the time goes by so fast in these things. Like I feel like I've been here for 20 minutes and I'm like, oh, it's 4:30 and I have to go soon. But I'm just going to answer a few more questions in here. This is so sweet. When I share my needs and feelings, my avoidant spiritual partner tells me he doesn't want to have to meet needs. He just wants to surrender to unconditional love. Wow. What to do? Okay. So I want to say so much about this right now. Like, okay. We are both, okay, there's a great book. I'm going to tell you this from a spiritual perspective. There's a great book. You've probably read it or your partner has probably read it. It's a really well-known book. It's called, Not the Power of Now, A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. And one of my favorite things that he says in this book is that we are human beings. We have the human side and the being side. We have like the material side, like show up, participate in the world, work, commit to things, follow through. And then we have the spiritual side, which is like the being, the passivity, the surrender, the more feminine energy, the openness, the receptivity, the nerd, all these different aspects of the personality. And our job is to manage both. Our job is to connect to and nurture both sides. And to be honest, anytime I see somebody too polarized, and I've really looked for this and studied this a lot because for different reasons. One of them being that at a point in my life when I started really healing, I was like, oh my gosh, I think I want to go live in an ashram and just, live this sort of monk life. And I was curious. And then I've known a lot of people and worked with people who are previously monks, and they have struggled. They've struggled coming back and participating in the world again. And if that's the struggle, then your mind wasn't necessarily enlightened. It was maybe, enlightened in a way when you were in a certain environment, but when you come back, if everything triggers you again, then there's work to do in that space. So I won't go into it for too long, but basically, I would definitely say that that's just an avoidance strategy disguised as spirituality. And that as human beings, we do have a commitment to each other. We do have, some kind of we have to behave in a certain way. We have to, connection requires certain things. If you're going to be in a committed relationship to another person, part of it means there's an exchange of energy. And so to me, I hear that as a big avoidance strategy, to be quite honest. We have a certain commitment to the way we treat our planet, the way we treat ourselves, the way we treat other animals, other human beings in our environment. And so if we're participating in a relationship, and that's what an avoidant person says, to me, I honestly just hear avoidance strategy. I think it's fair to say, hey, there's some needs that I don't want to meet, or some needs I want you to meet yourself. But there's a big difference between that and just saying, no, I can't meet any of your needs. So I would just be really clear and maybe go through the needs course and the conflict resolution course. And in the first module, write all your expectations and your needs out, and then just ask your partner, do you think based on these needs and expectations we've discovered, do we think that this is a reasonable amount to bring into a relationship? How does a relationship work by nobody meeting each other's needs? I would just sort of dive into that a little bit, but it's a really amazing question. And I see where you feel frustrated there, because that's a tough one, right? You're up against something that it's hard to argue, because spirituality is such a opinionated, belief-oriented space, right? So yes, Mark, the perfectionism is real, and it's important to sort of shift and navigate differently, right? So you're not re-traumatizing yourself. So I'm going to stick around for another 10 minutes and just answer a few more questions. I do have to run fairly soon because I have a call. I super appreciate your guys' really sweet comments in here. Thank you, Max and Jermaine and Oslam. I call it, I need to go into hibernation now. Once getting out, and once you get out of that, you crazy call and connect with everyone. It's not a bad thing when you do that. You're listening to yourself, right? It's important that you're listening to yourself at that bottom rung of your ladder. Whoa, I'm tired, and taking space and listening, and then you come out and then you're ready again, right? And you're fulfilled. So that's beautiful. That's really beautiful. So Rebecca, a gentle introduction can be an amazing gift. Thank you. That's so beautiful, Rebecca. Wow, that's wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. To Max's question way up above, I had a friend tell me about the personal development school. Oh, wow. That's so cool. Thanks. I'm really glad to hear that. Okay, so where I sort of jumped around in the comments a little bit. Yes. Okay, I'm going to talk about this. You said something about DAs. So Maggie says, I'll find that article and read. Very cool. Thank you, Max, so much. Thank you. These comments are so touching to my heart. Yeah. So, and you guys are helping each other in here. I'm so impressed by so many of the things that you guys are doing and sharing and saying, and it's really, really beautiful. So thank you for paying and passing everything ahead and expanding it. So Maggie says, you said something about DAs having a tendency to believe they're deactivating thoughts when triggered. Yes, they really do, right? Because those deactivating thoughts, just like all of us do, right? Just because they're deactivating thoughts do not mean that those thoughts are less believed. Just like The anxious, for example, believes they're activating thoughts. They believe this person might leave me. I need this person to do this. I need this, or the fearful avoidant believes maybe they're distrusting thoughts. I definitely can't trust this person now. They were incongruent there and da-da-da. And we all believe our thoughts when we're triggered. And that's why we're triggered in the first place, is because we've identified with this concept, right? And so, oh, yay. I love that you said that, that Chelsea would love a mastermind group. That's super exciting. Okay, so I'm glad that there's other people that want it. I didn't even know, Jermaine, you really wanted it. So I'm glad to hear that. Okay, so we all believe our thoughts when we're triggered. And the difference is, right, that when we're in this space and this is happening, the dismissive avoidant has these deactivating thoughts. So they might believe things when they're deactivating. They're trying to not feel vulnerable because vulnerability doesn't feel good. And they associate vulnerability with not being safe, not being received well, being rejected in some form, emotionally or physically. So all of these things happen, and then their thoughts are designed to create space between themselves and somebody else in order to keep them safe and free from pain. So deactivating thoughts are just thoughts, again, that are being identified with. And those things need to be questioned too. So if the story is, if I don't feel so passionate and obsessed with my partner, a decade into the marriage, and that must mean that I don't truly love the person. That's just a story. You're not supposed to feel obsessed with somebody 10 years into a marriage. You're supposed to feel a deep rooted sense of love and trust and connection and openness and care. We're not supposed to feel in honeymoon phase times 5. So, it's really just like any other attachment style. The dismissive avoidant needs to hold their deactivating thoughts in the light and look at them and question their stories, just like they're asking their partners or other people to hold themselves to that standard. So all those things need to really be brought into light and questioned. And that's the essence of self-trust. You can keep your opinion if you want. You can always keep your story, but don't just keep your story that's thinking you, meaning it's a form of trauma thought, thinking you on autopilot. Hold it in the light, take a look, see what you truly think, evaluate it, and then and then you can trust that story or not. If it's real for you or not. If it's true. So just like any other attachment style, it's really important that situation or that the dismissive avoidant question their own thinking too. So Jessie says, if DAs have the tendency to not, hey Shoku, yeah, I'll definitely say something about that. Okay, so I'm going to answer these last 3 questions here that I see. I haven't scrolled any further down, but I'm going to answer these questions. So where did it go? So Jessie says, if DAs have the tendency to not ask other people personal questions or emotionally check in, like, how are you today? It seems like they don't care about others. What will be a pattern DAs normally do for people when they do care without personal or emotional check-in? Great question. So I wouldn't say that it's like they don't care. I would say that it's like an unknown. So just like, I'm trying to think, how there's sometimes in life where we have unknowns and then they come into our awareness and we're like, oh, I didn't even realize that. Like, I don't know, for myself, I know before I understood like the world of like the subconscious mind and the stories, and when I was, so identified with thought and didn't know I could meet my own needs, they come into your reality. And it wasn't that you didn't care about those things before. It's that you just truly didn't know about them. And I would say that that's sort of how dismissive avoidants are. They're so dissociated from their own emotions for the vast majority of the time until their emotions become strong, right? And then they can feel them. But the vast majority of the time, they're not treating themselves like that in a relationship to themselves. And they've never seen that or had that be taught to them from anybody else. So it's really more like an unknown. And so what we see is that it's kind of strange for them and it's new for them. And anything that's strange or new and we haven't been doing tends to be something we have to sort of repattern into our reality. Like it takes a little while to sort of get back into that space again, right? It's like, or at all. It's like if we have a new program, it takes a while for us to adapt and practice and make it a new normal. We have to habituate it into our subconscious mind. So often, because DAs are a little bit resistant to change, And that's part of their comfort zone. And because this is an unknown, not only will they not ask those questions a lot, but they'll also even resist asking them when they learn about them, just a little bit. And it's not conscious and intentional. It's usually subconscious. Now, it's changeable and it can totally change. It can definitely happen. However, there's that in combination with the fact that they just have different love languages. So usually the way that you'll see, to answer the second part of your question, Jessie, usually the way that you'll see the dismissive, avoidant, express care is through acts of service, through gifts, and sometimes through words of affirmation. And not always the case, but I would say the vast majority of the time. And so that's their way of caring. They just care through a different filter of behavior. And it's usually the things that were shown to them. They'll care more about like physical needs or more in the survival oriented space and the emotional oriented space. Like I push up because it's like in the limbic system, sort of the higher elements of the brain. Instead of, and sometimes they'll connect really in the neocortex as well, like the logical sort of thinking mind. They'll connect intellectually. So things like that can take place as well. So these are great questions. So Shoku says, can you say a little bit more about the emotional coma of avoidance? Yeah, so I would just say that sometimes, just like anybody else, you can think of like if I have this whole thing of water, right? And it's like halfway full, the fearful avoidance tend to give a lot of their water to everybody. They're like running around like, hey, take some of my water. Look, guys, I found water. Take some, right? Like fearful avoidance are so like, I have this. I can't wait to share it with you and tell you and give it to you. And fearful avoidance tend to be like really good sharers, right? But sometimes they forget where the water runs out and they pour out all their water to everybody. And then they're like, I'm so thirsty. I need to like, come back to myself and give that. And when they deplete themselves or run out, and especially if you're not very good at replenishing your own cup, then what happens is you sort of retreat. And the next thing you know, you are in a space where you are, in that coma, so to speak, because you're out of resources. And by that time, you usually feel so mentally and emotionally depleted that you kind of just withdraw from everybody. And that's the withdrawing is a very strong coping mechanism for both fearful avoidance and dismissive avoidance. And then the dismissive avoidant coma is that they tend to go throughout the day with a lower level of water than other attachment styles. They're in a general state of fight or flight, low level, like 3 or 4 out of 10. And so they just have less to go around in the first place, and they're pretty aware of it a little bit, like a little more consciously. And so instead of hiding, at that tipping point when they realize, oh my gosh, I ran out of resources, they tend to be withholding. They tend to naturally feel like they're low on resources and naturally be like trying to keep those resources to themselves. And so that's sort of the big difference between the DA coma and the FA coma. And this is just a slang term. This isn't like obviously a real thing. But it's just sort of like to describe that state that they can get into. So the last question, thank you, Mark, that I still need to get an account for the course. Yeah, okay, thank you, Chelsea. I'll help you with that. I was wondering that too. And then, yeah, okay, good. Thank you for letting me know. So Shayna says, in the needs course, when I went to circle most of my important needs, I wasn't sure. Is this in relationship to each specific relationship I participate in, or identifying my most important needs in general? Great question. So there's different forms of needs, and I'm going to do a whole webinar this week on the needs course. So there's our basic human needs, which we all share, though the order and hierarchy changes individually. And then there's our personality needs, which are basically the strategies we're using to get those 6 basic human needs met. So for example, and that's based on positive versus negative associations that we experience over time. So for example, I might have a really high need for love and connection. And let's pretend that I never got along well with, let me see how I can illustrate an example. Let's pretend that I never got along well with friendships, right? And then let's say I go into my adult life, I might have a really strong personality need around family. That might be a very strong need for my personality. It's part of who I am, part of how I identify myself. I'm the family person. You hear men say, oh, he's such a family man, right? or family woman, or like, very motherly or whatever it might be. And so my brain will go, okay, if I didn't get along well with friends, I have negative associations to that form of love and connection. But if I got along well with family and that was really comfortable, then my brain builds a subconscious comfort zone around family. And then it goes, family works to get my basic human need met for love and connection. So now me being a family person becomes an identifiable part of my personality and something I talk about a lot, think about a lot, give my energy to, focus on, etc. So that would be one example or analogy of an output, right? And then you're going to have your tertiary needs, which are examples of moment to moment needs that you'll have that are actually still all, small streams going all the way back to that bigger river of your personality needs and then your basic human needs. But those will change and fluctuate. And there's sort of very indirect strategies to get those basic needs met. So for example, love and connection in one moment might be, I need validation because I'm feeling invalidated by that member of my family. Another moment, it could be, I just need a hug. I just need physical touch because that's something that I receive as love. And that feeds my, maybe for my family, I need a hug. And that feeds into family and then feeds into love and connection as my basic human need, right? So it kind of all leads back. But those moment to moment needs will change. Your personality needs do not change very much. They change, but they tend to change ever so slightly. And roughly every 3 to 6 months, you'll experience a change. And that estimate is based on how deep subconscious programs tend to sort of run. But there are exceptions to this. If there's a huge trauma that takes place that creates a big void in your subconscious mind, or it creates a strong emotional imprint, that can create change. If there's a massive change that takes place, or in a really exciting time with a huge emotional imprint, all these different things can shift your personality needs. But your tertiary needs, which I think you're referring to here, Shayna, are all of those different needs in the sheet. There's a bunch there. And they're listed as your tertiary needs. And those will change moment to moment with different people, with different relationships, all of that. So there's a lot more room for flexibility there for you to check in with yourself and go through that. So I hope that makes sense. Okay. So sorry to not respond earlier. Okay. Beautiful. Amazing. Okay. So, yeah. Okay. I will check on that as well. Hey guys, look, I found water. Yeah. that's what's going on, right? Yeah. So what's happening right now? I know a couple of you asked me about, so I'm not seeing clients at the moment, much at all, because I just got a book contract and all this stuff. So I think what's happening is if anybody's reaching out for client sessions, I think my, assistant's not passing those on. But I hear you guys, and I will be finished with this whole project soon. So I will connect. I'm just writing down names there. It's just been a super busy time. So that's probably why, because I know that those are about client things. So it's going to be a little while before I can see new clients and take new clients and stuff like that. But I will get in touch and just see what's going on and make a plan for the future. So thanks for checking in. What was the analogy? Oh, the analogy was just how fearful avoidants are they pass on their water. They're like, oh, I have water, look. And they're very strong about sharing. Thank you so much, Marcella. Okay, so I caught up on all the questions, which I'm so excited about. I love doing these. I know I say that every time. But I will see you guys on Tuesday next at 8 p.m. Eastern. And thank you so much for being here. As always, thank you for being an amazing group and making my life so much fun when I do these. And I will put a post in the Facebook group right now really quick. Yeah, see you next Saturday, Max. I will put a little post for mastermind groups and just, get the ball rolling on that as well. So you guys can do breakout sessions and little calls and get organized there also. So thank you so much, all of you guys, for being here. I hope you have an amazing rest of Saturday. Thank you, Max and Jesse and Shayna and Shoku and Jesse and Magni and Jermaine and Stuart and everybody in here. Have an amazing Saturday. I'll see you guys soon. Bye. Bye, Anna. Bye.